My name is Kieran Gibson. I'm the head of the Department of Physics at York, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this event as part of the York Festival of Ideas. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker for tonight. Jim Al-Khalili is Distinguished Professor of Theoretical Physics at the University of Surrey and one of Britain's best-known science communicators. He's written numerous books, including The World According to Physics, Quantum, A Guide for the Perplexed, and Life on the Edge, The Coming Age of Quantum Biology. He's a Fellow of the Royal Society and was appointed CBE in the 2021 birthday honours for services to science and public engagement in STEM. Finally, I would add he's also an honorary graduate of the University of York. We're delighted to welcome Jim back to the festival to talk about his latest book, The Joy of Science, in which he reveals the 8 lessons from the heart of science that can help you get the most out of life. I, for one, cannot wait to hear more. So, Jim, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Kieran, for that introduction. Well, good evening, everyone. Glad to be here, if not in person, in spirit anyway. And yeah, great to be talking at the York Festival of Ideas. I've spoken at the festival before. I've visited York University, as Kieran says. I'm an honorary graduate of the university, but I have many old, long-standing friends, certainly in the physics department there. I want to talk about this new book, The Joy of Science, that I've written, which is a bit of a departure. So Kieran mentioned a few of my previous books, which have basically been sort of, standard popular science, talking about stuff that I feel certainly I know more about than the average lay reader. So, sort of expertise explaining quantum mechanics, relativity, cosmology, that sort of thing, or the history of science. This book is a bit of a departure in the sense that, a lot of what I say is you might argue is common sense, or that you might also have strong views on. So it's not like I'm preaching to people who are, fill us, Jim, with your wisdom. So it's my views. I've reached that stage in my career now where I feel I can sort of impart wisdom. I realize I'm not quite as sharp and quick as my own younger research colleagues and students. So what do I have? Well, I like to think I have wisdom. So that's what this book is going to be about. I want to talk for about 35 minutes to give you all a chance then to ask me questions at the end. So what is it about? The Joy of Science. I want to begin with defining what science is and more importantly, what it isn't, because a lot of people think that science is facts about the world, the bones in the body, the elements in the periodic table, that sort of thing. That's not what science is. Science is not a collection of facts about the world. That's called knowledge. And there are lots of ways of gaining knowledge about the world, whether it's through art and literature, whether it's through contemplation, whether it's talking to people who know more about something than you do, reading books, some argue through religious texts. Science has an advantage, however, on all other ways of certainly gaining knowledge about reality, about our world. And that is because it relies on the scientific method. And in a sense, this book is more than just a celebration of science and how brilliant it is and how much it's taught us about the world, but it's also a celebration of how we do science. So science, I define it, well, I'm not the only one, philosophers of science, I like to think define it in this way as well. Science is a process, right? It's not knowledge, it's a process, it's a way of thinking that allows us to gain that knowledge about the world. Now, why do I think it's important to explain the benefits of science? So I'm an active academic. I've taught undergraduate lectures at the University of Surrey for 3 decades now. I have my research program, but I'm also a science communicator because I'm passionate about explaining stuff. I don't do that altruistically because I feel the world needs to know, but because I enjoy it. I like seeing that the light bulb go on above someone's head when I explain some concept, as much as I enjoy finding out that stuff for myself. So thinking scientifically is really what this book is about, and why we should be thinking more scientifically. First of all, well, having a society that's more scientifically literate is, of course, very important. It's very empowering. It can help us make decisions to disentangle the complexity of the modern world. We've learned this over the past 2 years of the pandemic, just how important it is to not be experts in the science, but to understand the importance, understand simple things, not just, whether to be vaccinated or not, but, with the benefits of flossing your teeth or recycling your rubbish, as well as having well-ventilated rooms when you've got a virus that's airborne, that sort of thing. A lot of it is common sense, but a lot of it is only common sense once we have learnt something about the world. If you recall, at the early days of the pandemic, the science experts were telling us all the importance of washing your hands. Wash your hands and sing happy birthday through twice, and you won't catch COVID. A few months later, by the summer of 2020, it was realized that this virus is mostly transmitted through the air. And so it wasn't so much about, yes, you still wash your hands for hygiene, but then what's more important became, not meeting in crowded rooms indoors, making sure the room is ventilated, the importance of wearing masks and so on. So society needs to have some level of scientific literacy, or at least to understand who can provide the sensible evidence based on scientific understanding. The second reason we should be thinking more scientifically is because of the scientific method itself. So I'm going to be going through a number of features of the way we do science, what we call the scientific method. In fact, science is so broad, there are many scientific methods. There's no sort of tick box to say, right, yeah, okay, this is the scientific method. There are lots of ways of doing science. But my argument in this book is that if we exported some of these ways, that when science is done well, how we do it, export it into everyday life, even if I'm not suggesting so that everyone becomes a scientist, but thinking in that rational, critical way can be very useful. Now, as I mentioned, science is broad. There are lots of ways of doing science. You can think of the astronomer or the cosmologist gazing up at the heavens or through a telescope these days to try and understand the workings of the stars and planets and galaxies and so on. Gathering data by observing, by capturing light that travels across vast distances of space. Then you'll have the medic, the clinician, carrying out double-blind clinical trials, maybe to work out the efficacy of a new drug or a new vaccine. You have the chemist working in a lab, maybe working with materials to trying to understand the structure of matter. The climatologist who writes computer programs to develop mathematical models to predict the way the Earth's climate will change. Or you can have the Einsteins writing algebraic equations on blackboards and thinking deep thoughts. These are all science, but these are all sort of the obvious traditional ways of doing science. Science is so much broader than that. I've presented The Life Scientific on Radio 4 for over 10 years now. And it's even for me as a practicing scientist, I've been amazed at just the breadth of what we refer to as science, from the psychologist or the neuroscientist to the geologist to the person working with insects to the guy who sits on the cliff's edge watching birds nesting, to the environmentalist studying the great apes, to the traditional physics, chemistry, biology type science. So what do they all have in common? What is it that defines the scientific method? Well, you might say that science is about coming up with a theory or hypothesis and then testing it through observational data, gathering data to check whether your theory is making the right predictions. Is it true or not? Well, historians do that as well, don't they? A historian comes up with a hypothesis, a theory, a narrative, and then looks for evidence to support or refute that particular narrative. So, is history then a part of science? No, but science and history, these are two disciplines which have this feature in common, coming up with a hypothesis or a theory, and then looking for evidence to support or refute that theory. Another definition of what science is, very often people talk about curiosity being important. You hear it, all children are born scientists because they're asking the questions, why? And then at some point, most people grow out of that. They grow up and they have to face the daily challenge of living their lives, and they stop asking why. Scientists are those children who've never grown up, because we don't stop asking why. So is that it? Is curiosity enough? Critical thinking, asking the questions, digging in. Well, yeah, that's a feature of the scientific method. But a conspiracy theorist will also argue that they're thinking scientifically. A conspiracy theorist, and you know what I'm talking about when I talk about conspiracy theorists. I mean, not all conspiracies are by definition wrong, right? There may be conspiracies out there that are true, that people are trying to follow. But you know what I mean by the conspiracy theorists. I'm talking about the moon landing deniers and the alien abductions and the 5G mask calls COVID and the earth is flat, the nonsense. A conspiracy theorist, however, will say, look, I am thinking scientifically. I'm being critical. I have an open mind. I'm not accepting what the standard narrative is. I'm looking for evidence to support my idea. Why isn't a conspiracy theory not a scientific theory? There's a very important distinction between a scientific theory and a conspiracy theory. You see, if you were to ask a conspiracy theorist, what evidence could I present to you that would persuade you that you are wrong and that you would change your mind? The conspiracy theorists would have, if they're honest, they would have to admit that nothing would. Nothing would sway them from their belief in whatever conspiracy they follow. Their minds are closed. They might argue that their minds are open, but they're not. It's the opposite in science. Sure, there are the scientists who are dogmatic, who will stick to their favorite theory in the face of evidence to the contrary. But on the whole, the scientific method ensures that if faced with evidence, observation, data, an experiment, or a better mathematical, more rigorous mathematical derivation that shows that what we believed to be the case was wrong, then a scientist is forced to change their minds. That defines what science is about. Whereas a conspiracy theorist could never change their minds, regardless, doesn't matter how much evidence you provide for them. Okay, so it's not simply being curious, and it's not simply coming up with a hypothesis to test against data. What about predictability? Very often you hear a good scientific theory is one that can make predictions that you can then go and test. The more predictions it can make, the more tests you can carry out to support it, I guess. And if something comes out to refute it, then of course you have to change it. So is making predictions then the key that distinguishes a scientific theory from everything else? Well, no. Imagine you read your horoscope. Not that I'm sure anyone here listening to my talk would do anything as silly as that. But let's go with me for a minute. You read your horoscope, and your horoscope says next Tuesday you'll receive good news. Next Tuesday you go into work, and sure enough, your boss offers you promotion. There you go. Your horoscope made a prediction, and it came true. Does this mean that astrology is a science? No. That was luck. There's no way. It is literally impossible. And scientists should never be, I'm going to come to this, and scientists should never be absolutely 100% certain, but as close to certain as I can be, that stars many light years away, whose light takes years to reach us cannot have any influence on the daily activities of us here on Earth, let alone any other influence through their gravitational pull. So making predictions isn't in itself a good enough criterion that defines the scientific method. There was I'll very briefly, because I don't want to sort of run out of time, but very briefly, there's an example in science where a scientific theory made a prediction which was shown to be wrong. And it was a very celebrated example. It was about more than 10 years ago now. Those of you who have a background in physics may know or remember this. Physicists at CERN created a beam of subatomic particles called neutrinos and fired them directly towards a laboratory under a mountain in Italy, the Gran Sasso laboratory. These neutrinos, these particles, interact so weakly with normal matter that they travel through the Earth as though the Earth is transparent, so they could follow a straight line. Now, the physicists calculated how long it should take these neutrinos to get from A to B, from CERN in Geneva to this laboratory in Italy. And they realized, they'd worked out that these neutrinos were traveling faster than the speed of light. Now, a physicist learns early on that Einstein's special theory of relativity says nothing can go faster than light. It's the maximum speed in our universe. Not because we've not been imaginative enough to find something faster, but because it's woven into the structure of space and time itself. It's part and parcel of our universe. There is no such thing as a speed faster than the speed of light. And yet here, we've found neutrinos that traveled faster. I, along with most physicists, didn't believe the results. In fact, not in common with most physicists, I went one step further. And on Twitter, I remember saying, if these neutrinos turn out to be traveling faster than the speed of light, and it's confirmed, I will eat my boxer shorts live on TV. Now, I forgot that a lot of my Twitter followers are journalists. And so before I knew it, I'm having to repeat the same story on Newsnight on BBC Two, much to my wife's embarrassment. Well, you know, I felt a bit awkward as well. I was getting sent recipes for sauces that you can add to cooked grilled boxer shorts. Anyway, why was I being so bullish about it? Why did most physicists disbelieve this? Is it because we're so close-minded? Is it because we're so intransigent and open to new ideas? No, it's because Einstein's theory of relativity had been tested again and again and again. Lots and lots and lots of experiments showed exactly that nothing can go faster than light. This would have brought down the whole edifice of modern physics if this result was right. Anyway, end of the story. The physicists in Italy realized that one of the cables in the back of one of their timing devices wasn't connected properly. Once it got clicked into place, suddenly the speed that they calculated the neutrinos were traveling at was slightly slower than the speed of light, as predicted by the physics that we do know and trust. So we are prepared to change our minds, and we do need data and we do need evidence, but the theories earn their stripes by being put to the test all the time. We're constantly testing our theories against evidence and against data. The opposite is sometimes true, that people have such a trust in science that they can be swayed by non-scientific ideas dressed up as good science. The modern day example of the snake oil in the Wild West probably would be the adverts that you see on TV about a new yogurt or a new face cream, and it has probably usually an actor in a white lab coat quoting some scientific term or some chemical name because it contains such and such. That must make it brilliant because it's science, isn't it? We need to know what science to trust and what not to trust. And of course, we've seen this very starkly over the last 2 years, because each side of an argument, let's say about wearing or not, the use of wearing face masks or not, each side has claimed that they have scientific evidence to back them up. and scientific reports, because science is so broad and not all science is good science. It's difficult to know which science is credible and who you can trust and what you can trust. Now, so I'm going to go through a few of these lessons in the book, which are part and parcel of the way we do science, and let's see how we might apply them to everyday life. First of all, something's either true or it isn't. Now, we live in a world today very often of what we can loosely call cultural relativism. In its pure sense, this is a good thing. It means being tolerant. It means being tolerant of other worldviews, of other cultures, of other ways of thinking. And that's a good thing. But when it infects truth about the nature of reality, and truth becomes relative, and truth becomes something that, well, you know, that's your truth, I have a different truth, then we're entering into a dangerous game. Because certainly there are truths about the complexity of human activities which are relative, subjective. But that doesn't mean that all truths are relative, that all truths are subjective. We can't create our own version of reality because it suits us. Like the supporters of Donald Trump who insisted that he hadn't lost the election. Creating a parallel universe in which the truth is what you create isn't going to lead anywhere good. I want to show you a few examples of truths. So first of all, I want to talk about moral truths. Philosophers have argued for millennia about whether there is even such a thing as an absolute moral truth, a line in the sand that, that transcends cultures, religions, ages, parts of the world. But I want to choose four which, at the face of it, might seem incontestable. Showing kindness and compassion is a good thing. Murder is wrong. Human suffering is bad. Actions more likely to bring harm than benefit are bad. Now, you might say that no one can really argue with these. It doesn't matter what part of the world you come from, what culture or religion you're tied to, these should be absolute. But you can always find a context in which things become a bit cloudier. The first one, I don't think it really tells us anything. Showing kindness and compassion is a good thing. It's almost a tautology. You might as well say being good is a good thing, right? So it's not really telling us anything. I don't want to say anything more about that. Murder is wrong. Well, the standard examples that are taught in sort of ethics or philosophy 101 classes is, what if you had the chance to go back in time and murder Adolf Hitler before he takes over and before fascism and the Holocaust and so on? Would you do it? Killing someone to save millions of lives. Is all murder by definition wrong? Wouldn't it be more wrong to stand by if you had the chance to stop Hitler, albeit in a rather dramatic way? Number three, human suffering is bad. Well, again, if you think of things like guilt or grief, they are forms of suffering as well. Are they bad? Grief defines the human spirit. Of course, it's not bad. We are allowed to grieve. That's not a bad thing. So not all suffering is bad. And then actions more likely to bring harm than benefits are bad. Well, it depends who for. An action might bring harm to someone and benefit to someone else. And then it's a case of weighing up which is the more important. Okay, so it's subjective. So moral truths are tricky. And it's not always easy to say, yes, there is an absolute moral truth. But I'm going to give you a list of truths that I'm going to call them facts. And bear in mind again that scientists should never be 100% certain. It's possible that I'm wrong about these, but I doubt it. Humans have walked on the moon. True. The Earth is flat. Not true. Life on Earth evolved through a process of natural selection. True. The world was created 6,000 years ago. Not true. Earth's climate is changing, mainly due to humanity's action. Well, increasingly, year by year, day by day, we're seeing evidence accumulating to suggest that this is also incontestably true. Nothing travels through space faster than light in a vacuum. True, and my boxer shorts are safe for now. Give or take, there are roughly 7 billion atoms in the human body. I haven't counted them personally myself, but that's a pretty good ballpark figure. 5G masks contribute to the spread of viruses, not true. Now, you may disagree with one or more of these statements, with my true or not true statement about them. But the reason why I'm so bullish about this is that if any one of them, particularly those that are based on our scientific understanding, if you're arguing something the opposite of what I'm saying, that would bring down the whole edifice of modern science. 400 or 500 years worth of modern science would have to be rewritten, because these are based on an understanding that has created our modern world. If you want to argue the opposite, then the onus on you is to explain how everything else can be explained if what I'm saying is not the case. So there are certain truths about the world, about how the world is. We can't create our own narrative. You cannot say, this is something that we see increasingly in modern society. Well, that's just your opinion. No, it's a fact. You might say that. There's a different way of looking at things. Sometimes that is true. If we're talking about politics or what football team you support or what music you like or art, then of course it's subjective. Of course we can have our own opinions and views, but that doesn't mean that spreads across all knowledge about our world and reality itself. Okay, not everything is as simple as you think. Well, this is an important one because, well, they're all important. What am I talking about? We live in a world where we're bombarded constantly by information from every direction, and wading through this complexity of information. What is good information? What is misinformation, disinformation, fake news is really difficult. So what we tend to do is simplify things down. It just makes life easier. And in large part, actually, due to the internet and social media, things are simplified down to memes, to tweets, to simple statements. And people don't want to be, don't baffle me with detail, don't blind me with science. No, I want to keep things simple, and simple is probably right. Not everything is as simple as we'd like it to be. We see this in particular, and I think this is a real issue that some modern society is facing up to now, that views and opinions on very complex social issues are being polarized into black and white, so that you're either on one side or the other. And there's no room for debate, because the person who says, well, you've got a point, but you've also got a point, will be attacked by both sides. And the tragedy is that the people who know most about a particular issue tend to also be the people who know where the gaps in their knowledge are, tend to also be the people who are not so strident and dogmatic. But if they dare to say there's nuance, there's gray between the black and the white, they're attacked by both sides. You're either with me or you're against me. And so they retreat, leaving the argument between two passionate opposing views, each one thinking they are 100% certain that they are right, and there's no room for maneuver. Sometimes things are just more complicated than we'd like them to be. And we see that again and again in science. We like to find the simple explanation, the logical explanation, the intuitive one, the common sense one of a particular phenomenon or mechanism or the result of an experiment. And time again, we realize by digging a bit deeper, actually, it's more complicated than that. Tough. If it's more complicated, it's more complicated. We need sometimes to dig a bit underneath the surface, because we shouldn't be so lazy not to want to acknowledge that our simple worldview might actually be more complicated than we think. Because you don't understand something doesn't mean you can't if you try. Well, we don't have to all be experts in everything, you know. And I don't, when I say you can't, you know, you can understand anything if you want, I don't mean we can all become experts in quantum mechanics. No more than, you know, I would say I don't need my plumber to come round because I'm an expert now because I watched a 3-minute video on YouTube. Nor am I an expert pianist or an expert 100-meter runner. You know, there are people who, for various reasons, you know, they may have a mental talent, a physical talent, a dedication to working and training and learning something that we don't have. They will simply know more than we do. That doesn't, however, mean we absolve ourselves from any responsibility of trying to learn a bit more about something. It links in with the other issue I just mentioned about things being more complicated than we'd like. You know, we do live in this world where, as I mentioned before, we're bombarded with information. And so, you know, life was easier in the past when we only read one newspaper. We got our ideological view from that paper because it agreed with what we already thought anyway. And we didn't have access to all the opposing views. Now they're coming at us in all directions, and we don't know how to discriminate between them. So what happens? We retreat to what we want to believe. Don't value opinion over evidence. Again, it linked to this idea of truth that, and we see this on social media. You can't, just because you have a view about something or you have an opinion, that trumps someone else presenting you with evidence or data. But we need to know what evidence to trust. We need to know what is mere opinion and what is something based on a reliable source, reliable information. You know, we see this today with fake news. You know, the population of Russia are no less intelligent than the population of Western Europe or North America, but it's hard. It's hard to have access to a different narrative from the one that's being fed to you by the state. And likewise, people who, you know, who are anti-vaxxers or follow some other conspiracy theory, you know, it's not that they're not intelligent enough to understand. It's just that they're being fed a narrative that is really hard for them to shake. They haven't been able to, or haven't been willing to dig in and say, where is this evidence coming from? Is this some opinion? Is it something that's ideologically motivated? Who is telling me this? How can I trust what they're saying? One way that science deals with this is to, rather than attack somebody else, if you're arguing with someone saying, oh, you know, you're just biased, that's just your worldview, you believe that because such and such, because you've read that article online or watched that video on YouTube. First, examine why we believe what we believe. You see, there is such a thing as confirmation bias. We like to hear what we already agree with. I'm hoping that many of you listening to me this evening, I say, oh yes, Jim, yeah, I agree with you. Well, I'm telling you what you already probably believe in. I don't think I'm changing. Well, maybe I am. Hopefully I am changing some people's minds. But confirmation bias is a powerful thing. And in science, we can't do that. I mean, yes, scientists are people, right? And we have our own biases, and we have, you know, I want my theory to be right. I want to get funding. I want to get promotion. I want to get the recognition from my peers. But if we come up with a new result, a new experiment, a new discovery, a new theory, we test and check that theory. We check our biases. Are we getting the result because we want it to be true? So examine your own biases before you criticize the biases of others. Why do you believe what you believe? And then almost probably most importantly of all, that comes from the scientific method, is don't be afraid to change your mind and admit your mistakes. In science, it's a strength to admit when you're wrong. Because if we didn't admit our mistakes, we'd still be believing what the ancient Greeks believed. How do we change our minds? You know, the washing your hands and then realizing that actually opening windows is more important. In the light of new evidence, science advances and our knowledge and our understanding increases. And that requires us to admit that we were wrong and to admit our mistakes. It's very empowering to admit when you're wrong. It's actually, it throws people off. If you're having an argument on social media or with a friend or colleague or family member about something, and they say something that actually, yeah, they've got a point there. What do most people do? They'll shift the goalposts. They're more worried about scoring points and winning an argument. But what if you were to say, "Oh, that's a good point. No, I hadn't thought of that. No, you're right. Maybe I was wrong about such and such." They wouldn't know what to do, right? But this is how we progress. In science, it's often said that good scientists can disagree without being disagreeable. We disagree all the time, but it's not about winning arguments. It's about looking for the truth. If only politicians could admit their mistakes when they get something wrong. But you see, in politics, admitting your mistake is a weakness. It's the opposite to what happens in science. Doubt is not a pleasant condition, says Voltaire, but certainty is absurd. We should never be 100% certain. We should always be open to realizing that maybe what we thought before was wrong. I want to finish in a couple of minutes. So I think I'll skip Plato's cave allegory and say something finally about the third reason why we should be thinking more scientifically. After all, this does tie in with the title of my book, and that is that a scientific understanding of the world can enrich our lives. In the same way that art and music can enrich our lives, understanding something about the world, it's not about cold, hard logic and rationalism. Having a scientific appreciation doesn't mean everyone has to become Mr. Spock. Okay, there's this wonderful quote from Richard Feynman. He says, "Poets say science takes away from the beauty of stars, mere globs of gas atoms. Nothing is mere. I too see the stars on a desert night and feel them. But do I see less or more? What is the pattern or the meaning or the why? It doesn't do harm to the mystery to know a little more about it." Science adds to the wonder. It doesn't detract. It doesn't take away the magic. I want to end with this example. Well, it's a well-trodden, well-used example, the example of the rainbow. I think Richard Dawkins has a book with this title, Unweaving the Rainbow. Carl Sagan wrote about the magic of the rainbow. But the poet Keats criticized Isaac Newton. He said, Newton has destroyed the magic of the rainbow by breaking light up into its prismatic colors, somehow explaining it does away with all the wonder. Nothing could be further from the truth. I'll give you two very short examples of why a rainbow is even more beautiful than you thought. I'm not going to talk about refraction and total internal reflection, but just contemplate this. The rainbow is created from billions of droplets of water in the sky from rain that are taking sunlight, breaking it up into the colors, the prismatic colors. They take it in, the light gets broken up into different colors as it enters each drop, bounces off the back, comes out to the front and breaks up a bit more. No two people standing even close together are seeing the same rainbow. We each see our own individual rainbow, because that drop of light, that drop of rain that sends red light at exactly the right angle to enter my eye won't send red light into the eye of somebody else. A different raindrop would have to send them their red light. So the rainbow that I see is made of droplets sending different colors to my eye that are not the same droplets as those that are sending the rainbow to somebody else's eye. So we each see our own individual rainbow. And the second point is that a rainbow, you talk about a rainbow being an arc, never mind the pot of gold. a rainbow is really a circle. You would see this if you stood on top of a mountain or from the window of an aircraft. Pilots talk about this. They see these circular rainbows all the time. You only see an arc because the rainbow's cut off by the ground. A rainbow is a circle, and each of us sees our own rainbow. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, that doesn't detract from the magic of the rainbow, but we know that because we have a scientific understanding of rainbows. And that's where the cover of the book comes from. The very clever people at Princeton Press. So the eight lessons from the scientific method. Then I've got 2 different rainbows. Each one's a circle. They had to explain it to me what it meant. Said, oh yeah, oh of course. Oh, they're very good. Well done. Thank you. I like that title. Good. I will end there, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions. Thank you all very much.
Thanks a lot, Jim. That was really fantastic and very thought-provoking. And there's a few questions coming in on the Q&A, but I had a couple myself actually, and I wondered if 70 odd years ago, C.P. Snow and the 2 cultures. Do you think the 2 cultures are further apart than they were 70 years ago, or are they closer together?
I think so. The 2 cultures, the science and the arts, I would argue actually they are a bit closer together now. I think certainly my generation of science communicators, very often we've talked about our remit in communicating science is to try and embed science within popular culture. We want science to be talked about in the same breath that people sit down in a bar or pub or restaurant or family and talk about, you know, sport or music or politics. It's not quite got there yet, of course, but we have seen a shift. You know, if you think it's not that long ago in the news, a science story will be the thing relegated to right at the end. And finally, clever boffins have done something. Oh, you know, aren't they clever and otherworldly? Now science, you know, whether it's the Higgs boson or whether it's a new planet or whether it's a new vaccine, or you know, scientific discoveries, I think, are much more part of the conversation in society. So I think that is bringing the 2 together. Yes, we tend to think that maybe there's an increase in anti-science sentiment or unscientific thinking, but I think that's always been around. I think that's been amplified by the internet and social media. I'd like to think that science, certainly in the UK, maybe not in every country in the world, but certainly in the UK, I think that divide is getting closer. Not close enough to persuade BBC commissioning editors, you know, who come from an arts background, that scientific documentaries are still worth making because there's an audience out there. I think they're scared of science and they think everyone else is. So I think we still have work to do.
Well, actually, on the subject of scientific programs, there's a suggestion more than a question from Graham Banks. How about a popular science TV program that takes an hour or 2 to explain some of the truths that you quoted, boiling them down to experiments that ordinary people can do themselves rather than feel they have to trust scientists? I mean, I guess there's a bigger question there about whether the glossy science theories actually do the hard nuts and bolts enough.
I think that's a good point, actually. That's actually quite a nice idea. Yeah, I think that the pressures on making a science documentary are that it's not just meant to be education, it's meant to be entertainment as well. You know, that's why, you know, people complain, why, you know, when Brian Cox is gazing up at the stars, why is there background music? Well, it's because he's not giving a lecture, you know, it's a visual experience. So you're meant to enjoy it as well as learning something from it. But yes, I think those facts that I quote, you know, I was sort of very deliberately bullish and say, no, it's right, no arguments. You know, if you disagree with me, right, we'll sort it out in the car park behind whatever it is behind the Zoom. We're hundreds of miles away, so we can't get into fisticuffs if we disagree. But it's true that, you know, I've said that is what it is, and I stand by it. What evidence do I have? How do I justify that? Breaking it down is actually would be very good. I think that would be a good point. Something like, you know, let's take one example, that the Earth is flat. There's just so much evidence that the Earth is flat that you wouldn't know where to start. You know, that you could. and that tiny fraction of society who think the earth is flat would not be persuaded by any amount of evidence, however well the program was put together. But I certainly agree with the questioner that there may be some of those other truths that I quoted that would be very interesting to say, well, where did you get that figure from? How many atoms in the human body, if you didn't count them, or that nothing can go faster than light? So I worth bearing in mind, I think, for potential future documentary.
Okay. Next one. Well, early on in your talk this evening, you spoke about conspiracy theory, and there's been a few people who've supported the question, saying, by your definition, is religion conspiracy theory?
No, I would make a distinction between it, absolutely. And I should show my cards. I'm a humanist. I'm not religious. I'm an atheist. But first of all, I think the big distinction is that a conspiracy theorist is absolutely certain. I think most thinking people for whom their faith is important are not absolutely certain. They're racked with doubt all the time. Even with a religious faith, you're looking for evidence. You're looking for confirmation. You go through periods where you don't know if you believe what you believed before or not. You can get closer or further away from religion. So I think with a religious faith, things are a bit more different, and the lines are blurry. There's no absolute line in the sand. When we talk about religion, when I talk about the sense of a religion, I'm thinking of my Anglican friends who have no problem with the theory of evolution or the Big Bang theory or anything like that. They have a rationalist worldview, but also have, their faith is very important for them. And you're not going to talk to someone like that in the way you talk to a conspiracy theorist and try and persuade them that, that what they believe is wrong. So I think there is a distinction between the two.
Okay. Next question is from John Toy. You mentioned the importance of truth and trust. What importance do you place on the role of ethics in scientific research?
Hugely. I think it depends on which area of science you work in. So for me as a theoretical physicist, it's not something I have to be as concerned about. If I'm, writing down Schrodinger's equation of quantum mechanics, then, ethics doesn't come into it. And, and not talking about putting cats in boxes either, shutting them with some radio poison. But of course, if you're working in the social sciences, in psychology, or in medicine, absolutely, ethics is central to what is done. And I think we've come a long way in terms of building ethics into what sort of research is funded, how it's conducted, what needs to be taken into account in laboratory experiments. So yeah, ethics is absolutely important, but it really does depend very much on the area of science. Okay.
Andrea is talking about the various channels of communication for science to the general population. Blogs, videos, documentaries, books. Do you think there's a more effective channel to reach people? Or which of those is the most effective, and what are the respective roles of those different channels of communication?
Well, I think it depends on which sectors of society we want to reach. Let's say the Life Scientific that I present on Radio 4, that has 2 million listeners every week, right? So, but they're of a certain age. So the average, the bell curve, the cross section of society, they tend to be people who are sort of my age and older. Teenagers aren't going to listen to the Life Scientific, but teenagers will watch a 3-minute video on YouTube. So I think the internet has certainly democratized science communication. It's democratized all sorts of information. It's given everyone a voice. And I think there are lots of ways that we can be, mediums that we can use to get scientific ideas across, and also to allow for debate and discussion. We've moved a long way from science communication being, I'm the expert, you don't know anything, I'm going to tell you lots of stuff, just listen to me. to engaging, right? So two-way conversation. And again, you know, technology, the internet has allowed that to develop in a very incredible way, in a way that's, you know, normal traditional broadcasting, radio and television can't do. So I wouldn't say there is one way of getting the message across, of communicating science. I think it depends on who you're talking to find the most appropriate platform.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, so there are a couple of comments in here which are actually rather personal about the book itself. So I wondered if you have time to answer that. The first one is, do you have any plans to visit the USA for a book event? Atlanta, ? That's from Rohit.
I was hoping to get across to the USA this October for a book tour, but I can share with you that my ESTA, the visa waiver to get into the US, was declined, and it was declined. The only reason I can think of is because I was born in Iraq. No other, because on the form there's nothing else. You don't say, you know, I hadn't been anywhere dodgy. I hadn't, you know, the question I answered were all perfect. So what this has meant is that I have to apply for a US visa, and that's a process that takes a long time. So the earliest possible opportunity I could get for an interview, which I have to have at the US Embassy in London, is on January the 3rd. So that means my US book tour has had to be cancelled for this year, sadly. I'm hoping I can sort out this nonsense, get my visa, and then have a book tour next year. Fingers crossed.
Well, actually, there was another question which I was going to come to, which is touches upon that, which is the book available in Baghdad?
It's certainly currently being translated into Arabic. There's I think it's a Saudi Arabian publishers, Al Adab. I think they're based in Saudi Arabia. Usually translation houses in the Arab world have traditionally tended to be in Cairo and Beirut. But I think there's a translation house now in Saudi Arabia. They translated my previous book, The World According to Physics, into Arabic, and they're translating Joy of Science into Arabic now. So there will be an Arabic version in the coming months.
Thank you. Okay. I think, thank you for everyone who's put in questions. Apologies that I haven't been able to come to them all. I've tried to get a balance across questions that have been put forward. So it's left with me now to formally give a vote of thanks for Jim's presentations this evening. I found it fascinating. If we were in face-to-face, in-person event now, I'm sure there will be a loud kind of round of applause. It was a really illuminating and entertaining presentation, which I think, you know, will leave people with a lot of food for thought. You mentioned at the start of the talk, when describing the book, saying it was a bit of a departure for you and how you were moving away from the kind of the technical explanations, and now you were feeling empowered to pass on your wisdom. Well, I think certainly I can say that we've all benefited from that wisdom this evening. So thank you very much, Jim. Sadly, the audience are silent, so we can't have that round of applause. But just imagine it ringing in.
I'd imagine a roar of applause. Absolutely.
Okay, and so with that, I've just got a couple of things that I want to say to close. It is the end of the festival tomorrow. It's the last day of the festival. But I hope that you'll be able to go to the festival website and look at all the events that have happened so far, including this one. Importantly, if you'd like to purchase a copy of Jim's book, The Joy of Science, with signed book plates, will be available from our partner bookseller, Fox Lane Books. And for more information on book sales, please see the festival website again, or you can go directly to foxlanebooks.co.uk/festival of ideas. And I believe that's also been included in the chat. So I would hope you take the opportunity to do that. And yeah, we'd like to see the festival is a live festival that, you know, creates debate, stimulates debate and ongoing discussions, especially on social media. And so we'd want you to continue to contribute to the conversations using the hashtag York Ideas. So with that, thank you everyone for coming. I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as I have. And thank you again, Jim.